It's such a drag now that I have to talk. Because I'd like to do that again. This is my official pitch to all of you to come to Bible study. It is on Mondays, and unfortunately now you'll have to wait until January because we are on our Christmas break. We do take a break from Bible study over this time, but you should come because 1, it's fun. 2, it's great people. 3, it's wonderful conversation. And 4, I have to say, as a minister, as someone who preaches, you do get this very interesting experience where you leave Bible study and completely delete everything that you had written for a sermon that you were preparing for in favor of something that came up in Bible study because it's incredible and amazing. And it's all around what to do with this guy named Joseph. Surely he's an important figure. He's in our Bible. We read a lot about him, and we get so very little about him. It's very odd what we are to do with him. And I think part of how we understand what to do with Joseph and his boy Jesus is to spend a little bit of time looking at 2 other father-son pairs that involve this guy named Jesus. Would you pray with me? O God, may the words of my mouth and the meditation of all of our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. So, 2 father-son pairs. The first one I want to talk about are the Herods, because there are 2 King Herods in Jesus' life. There is Herod the Great, who we have in the Nativity story, and then there is his son, Herod Antipas. Antipas? Yes, Antipas. The Reverend Doctor declares. Antipas. And so let's talk a little bit about this guy. So Herod Antipas was the king over Jerusalem and Judea when Jesus was crucified in his adulthood. He was the king who presided over the execution of John the Baptist as well. And this man grew up in the lap of luxury, what you might expect a prince would. Palaces and riches, indulging with every want in the perverse delight of Rome at its height. When he rose to power, he was exactly the kind of king that Rome wanted out there, one who mostly stayed out of the way, one who could be distracted with pleasures and wines, one who would let the bureaucrats run the whole show, collect the taxes, send them west in a timely manner. Picture, if you would, in your mind, the version of Herod Antipas from Jesus Christ Superstar. It's not that far off. So Herod Antipas inherited the throne from his father, Herod the Great, who is the Herod we talk about now when we read this story. But it was not without much consternation because Herod the Great did not favor his boy, Herod Antipas. Herod the Great did not think Antipas could hack it as king, that he wasn't smart enough, that he was too feckless, too indulgent, too distracted. He named 3 other heirs to the throne before Herod Antipas, passing him over each time. And every time one of those other brothers died, perhaps Herod Antipas showed up to the door saying, "Is it me, Pa?" To which Herod the Great said, "I have other sons." It wasn't until 3 other brothers died that finally, 4th choice, Herod the Great chose Herod Antipas to be his heir. But even then, something must have been in his mind because on his deathbed, he said, "No, you will not be king. Instead, there will be a tetrarch. There will be 3 rulers over this area after I die." So he had to split that throne with 2 of his other brothers. And of the 12 regions that made up Judea, their kingship, Herod Antipas would rule over only 2, Galilee being one of them. We can imagine what this did to this man's ego. Someone who already was a bit spoiled, a bit angry, a bit spurned, and this does not make for a stable leader. The indignant entitlement and resentment Herod Antipas felt toward his father reflected in his rule. He was constantly building things in the name of Emperor Tiberius. the other dad, way far away. Countless building campaigns and temples in his honor, renaming sites in honor of Emperor Tiberius. Gives you a picture as to who this guy was. The second man I want to talk about is Pontius Pilate, the governor of Judea under Herod Antipas. And Pontius, he was born for this. There is spotty record of his life before his governorship, but his family members were other high-ranking political bureaucrats, his father and others, and it was under their tutelage and mentorship that he was honed through his boyhood, adolescent, and early manhood years, ready for this kind of work, like a stone set in a slingshot, pulled back, ready to fly forward with purpose and force. He had to do this. He had to not only achieve great things in his life for himself, but for his family too. For that name too. The name that carried weight. He was fully expected to keep it up, to not let the side down. And we can safely, I think, make some assumptions about what such a childhood was like, growing up in that long shadow of high expectations. So when he was selected for the governorship, I imagine that there were knowing nods and self-satisfied handshakes between the established men of his family. It's what us Pilates do. We never expected anything less of our boy Pontius. He's following in our footsteps, continuing our legacy. He'll do nothing less but make us proud. And he would, definitely. He was smart enough, he was clever enough, he was diplomatic and versed in the law enough to be a really great bureaucrat, but there was just something else going on. He could never quite get his footing because of these dang Judeans. They kept rising up. They kept fighting and rioting. There was always some scrabble to deal with them. Whenever things were just about going right for Pontius Pilate, smooth enough to make some moves, make some history, make a name for himself, these people always went and did something to pull it out from under him and ruin everything. And his training and his education and his diplomacy, his way of ruling had very little lasting effect. There were 4 other governors before him, and Rome breathed down all of their necks just as it was breathing down his to get these people under control. And we can imagine the weight of a lifetime of expectation too coming to bear on him with the angry messengers from the city far away, the stress and the worry and the self-doubt and the fear and the anger, all of which ultimately led to his undoing. Fed up at wit's end, grasping at straws, when years after the crucifixion, he went and did something outside of his training, outside of his preparation. He quelled an uprising with such incredible violence and horror that he was seized by the local legate and sent back to Rome to answer for his actions. How bad do you have to be for Rome to say, that was a bit much? It is at this moment that Pontius Pilate vanishes from history. We know he is taken, that he is brought back to Rome, he lands there, and that's it. The pressure and the promise, the perfection ended in bitter, frustrated shame. Herod and Pilate, 2 men of power in Jesus' life who Jesus would contend with. Both of them their father's sons, shaped by their weaknesses and their failures, by their strengths and their successes, and ultimately their inability to rise to the challenges of their lives, to meet their greatest battles with character and resilience. And for Jesus, God and Son of God, who was man too, would also need to be raised by a man, just as Herod and Pilate were raised by men. So who would Jesus' father be? Well, it's this guy named Joseph. and it had to be Joseph. It had to be someone who wrestled with the choice as to whether or not to be a father, especially a father to a boy who was not his by blood. It had to be a man who had full right, full ability, and there was full expectation for him to turn Mary and the unborn Jesus away and yet decide, no, I will do this instead. And do it not out of a duty to produce an heir. There are no riches to pass down here. Not to protect a legacy. That is all but spent at this point in Joseph's life. But because in a world rough and cruel, fighting and grinding as this one can be, simply because a boy deserves a chance to make it. To not be ground into bitter, entitled, shivering kind of man who hurts as he has been hurt, who blindly requires bloody revenge for all ills. A boy deserves a chance to achieve more than his father, to succeed more fully, deserves a chance to rise. And so for God, it has to be Joseph. A boy deserves a father to be there to love him, to care for him, to correct him, to teach him. It has to be Joseph because he knows how heavy the weight of old responsibilities and expectations can be, and he knows how to stow that. He knows how to let it roll over his mind. Joseph, the carpenter, great-great-grandson of kings and prophets. He knows that in this world, the thing that makes a difference every single time is simply having someone there to love you. To not solve all of your problems, to not blame you for every mistake, to not hold your feet over the fire, but sometimes to simply say, I don't know either, but I'm here. Present, confident, grounded. A father's love. And with that, Jesus, a boy, any child can grow and rise to meet any challenge and then rise further still. And whether you are a father or not, a son or not, I very firmly believe this is the lesson of Joseph to all of us at Christmas time. To believe in and respond in kind to a divine call to lift up those around us who deserve a similar chance, no matter who they might be. A chance against all of the selfishness and greed and entitlement and bitterness of the world, the chance to rise above it all, to achieve, to create, to succeed. Joseph steps in. And it's not always easy, fun, or simple to be Joseph. People might call you crazy or an old fool. But when it comes down to it, there are few greater callings in life than to give humanity, the people in it who you encounter, to give people a chance to make it, a chance to be whole, secure, and loved. Amen.